If you bought LSD in the late 80s or early 90s on the East Coast, you probably got it from me. By the time I was 19, I was supplying 15 colleges in 5 states with marijuana and LSD. I'm too smart to get caught. I'm 20 years old and I'm like LSD kingpin, public enemy #1 in Fairfax. I thought it could go on forever. Boom, just like that. My whole world came crashing down. You know, they were building a federal indictment against me. I'm like, I'm facing 70 to life? Seth Ferrante, Fairfax County LSD kingpin. I grew up in a military family, so I was a military brat, man. We moved around a lot. Never really stayed in any place more than 2 or 3 years. You know, the only thing, you know, that kind of sucked from a kid's perspective is we moved around so much, I was always the new guy. And always being in a new situation, I was just always insecure in my surroundings. I was insecure in my relationships. You know, I was insecure in everything. I was born in California, and a lot of my formative years were spent there. I met Marcy in San Jose, California in 8th grade. Marcy was real colorful, real vibrant. Her hair would be pink. She had like a real gothic type of style.
Back in junior high, he was like a preppy kid who was trying to be like a surfer kid. And if he pulled that off, I don't really know, but that's what he looked like.
Just over the years, I always kept in touch with her. Even though it's been a more long-distance type of relationship, she's just been a big constant in my life.
He was very ambitious, and he wanted to conquer the world. He was like Seth Napoleon Ferrante. I knew somehow he was gonna do it because he's just that kind of guy.
I would say my relationship with my parents growing up, I was close to my mom. You know, I was kind of like a mommy's boy. We had a real special relationship. When I was 13, my mom told me that my stepfather wasn't my biological father because he adopted me when I was 2. So I was raised calling him dad. I thought he was my dad. In 8th grade, me and 2 of my friends, you know, we decided to smoke some marijuana. I had never really thought of smoking weed, but, you know, these were pretty much my 2 best friends. And I was like, okay, you know, let's try it. And we got some Thai sticks, you know, which is some really good weed. And we went back and we smoked it. It kind of made me feel whole or complete. It was like what I was missing for whatever reason. You know, the high from the marijuana, it just, you know, made me feel almost at ease. I mean, I was really kind of a brash, bold, you know, reckless kid. I would keep, you know, marijuana, alcohol. I think even back then, I was, you know, experimenting with like speed or methamphetamine and stuff like that. I remember one time, you know, my stepfather, John, he actually searched my room and he found the marijuana. And I remember just feeling so, I was outraged, you know, that he would invade my privacy like that and steal my stash. My family moved to England in 1984 because my dad got stationed over there. You know, I was almost 14, going into 9th grade, and we lived over there from 1984 to 1987. I met Eric Wheaton in London probably like the end of my 9th grade year, going into my 10th grade year when he moved over there. He was a senior. We just started partying. He was like a metal dude. I was like a metal dude. We were both into like glam metal, Motley Crue, Rat, you know, Metallica, bands like that.
I met him in England the very first time at the commissary. He was bagging groceries. He was wearing these black moccasin boots that came up to his knees, some leather pants, and he had, you know, big long hair that came across his face. My mom, she looked at Seth and goes, "Oh my God, what a scumbag." And I looked at her and I said, "He looks just like me." It was kind of inevitable that we were going to meet and become friends.
When he moved over there, he came from Virginia. He brought like a Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am. I mean, it was real unique because you don't see Trans Ams like that over there. It just really made us stick out.
And we'd go and, see Guns N' Roses or Iron Maiden. We got to hang out with Faster Pussycat and Guns N' Roses. And that's kind of where the partying really started, was hanging out with guys that were much older than us and had much better access to drugs than we did. We were doing much cooler stuff than an 18 and a 16-year-old should have been allowed to do.
Everybody wanted to smoke weed, everybody wanted to smoke hash, but a lot of people were scared to go down and get it. Down in the town in High Wycombe, they had a lot of like Jamaican guys, and they would sell the hash down there. It was mainly hash. A lot of the kids, like they would experience, they would go down there and they would get ripped off. In those type of situations, I was kind of fearless. My friends, they would give me 20, 30, 40, 50 quid to go buy hash. It benefited me because I wanted to smoke hash, and the less hash I got to pay for that I could smoke, the better.
He ran the high school. Everybody came to him for everything. He was definitely like a legend in the school. It was funny how people talked about him. Seth's a god. Seth stands up to the system. Seth this, Seth that. It drove the rest of us nuts. It was weird that he was that young and ran everything.
That whole 9th grade year, really looking back, I was incorrigible. I thought I was like Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Jeff Spicoli was my role model. Just partying and getting high, being rebellious, talking back to the teachers, cutting class to smoke cigarettes. I mean, I was out of control.
I remember when he went to London, the letters that I started getting from him, he was kind of talking about getting in fights, which was never anything he would ever do. And then the next letter I would get, yeah, I got suspended again. Then it kind of got into, I'm smoking a lot of pot and drinking a lot of beer and fuck school, basically.
We would see parties in the movies, and we thought that's how parties were supposed to be, like 16 candles. So we would have these huge bash parties, and our houses would just get trashed. We were both military brats in England. So we'd wait for our parents to go on vacation to Germany or something, and then we'd throw these big parties, and there was no consequences. We could do whatever we wanted, and we knew it, so we did it.
One time I went down to Portobello Market and Notting Hill Gate area in London. I went down there with a friend, and we had scored some hash, and some cops rolled up on us. We're like American white kids, like in a Jamaican area, standing right outside, a bar that's known for drug dealing. So, I mean, they knew what we were there for, and they searched us, they found the hash, but really what made it worse is I had like an American style, like a buck knife, like a big buck knife that I had bought on the base, with like a 5 or 6 inch blade. And, any blade over a certain length, I think like maybe 3 inches was like considered, like a lethal weapon. So they caught me with that, and they arrested me for that and the hash. After I got arrested, the American military, my stepdad's superiors, they put a lot of pressure on him, to get me out of the country because I was an embarrassment for my family, I was an embarrassment for my stepdad, and I was especially an embarrassment for the American military. So they sent me back to Northern Virginia to live with my godmother for about 6 months before his term of duty was over.
I came about 2 weeks after Seth. My family still had a year to go in England. I was 1 year out of high school, and I was from Virginia anyways, so it made sense to go back.
So I moved back to kind of this really upper middle class area in Virginia, Fairfax County. It was the kind of area where at 16 years old, the kids got brand new 5.0 Mustangs, or they got like hand-me-down Mercedes or BMWs. I mean, I'd never really, been in an area like that, like a lily white area with all basically rich kids. When I first got there, we were going out, we were trying to score drugs. And a lot of times, I just found it was really, really hard, to get drugs. Or when we could find it, like the quality of marijuana was real low, or like the acid would be really, really expensive. And I just felt like I was getting ripped off. And especially being from California, I knew a lot of people in California. I had a lot of friends in California. So eventually what I did, I just started getting some of my people that I knew there, to send me. They would send me weed, or they would send me, acid. I would get a couple ounces. I would get like a sheet of acid, and I would sell to my friends there. But eventually, some of the rich kids in Northern Virginia, they came to me and they're like, hey, man, we can get some money. We can get a couple $1,000s. And I started making deals and I got more drugs sent. It just kind of took off from there and grew into this really big thing in a real short amount of time. When I started dealing drugs, I became like a rock star.
He loved the power that the drugs gave him. He would laugh because we would walk into a room and everybody would just like flock to him, knowing that he had the dope, and ask him if he needed anything, ask him where he wanted to sit, did he want to meet any of the girls? It was, he loved it. He got off on it.
He's just kind of, they're going, all right, guys. Mr. Big Man, however he could get the attention was good enough for him. He said, I'll stop when I get enough.
I thought it could go on forever, but then disaster struck. My whole world, everything I thought I was, kind of came crashing down. I was the type of dude, when I was 15, 16, I would go to parties, I would bring a sheet of acid, and I would just give out hits. I would roll up, big fat, like Cheech and Chong joints, and I would smoke them with people. I always wanted that recognition. I wanted to be the best, and it's something. And sports, I was never the best. Academics, I was never the best. Even with the girls, I was never the best. Then when I started becoming a drug dealer, I could be the best drug dealer. I could be the best bad boy. And it was easy, it wasn't that hard.
He was like the nicest drug dealer ever, It always makes me think of Will Ferrell in that movie. He's like, I'm gonna be a nice crack dealer. Like, hey guys, want some crack? And that's how Seth was. I don't think he ever threatened anybody ever. Like, hey, if you don't bring me my fucking money, I'm gonna kill you. It was never like that. It was just like, oh yeah, you need some more acid? Sure, take what you need. I mean, I guess in retrospect, he was kind of a shitty drug dealer because he, he was too nice to everybody.
As some of my friends who were older, like when I was 16 and 17, started graduating and going off to colleges, like James Madison University in Virginia, Virginia Tech, Radford, as they started going to these schools, they would still hit me up for drugs. Hey man, come up this weekend and party, bring some marijuana, bring some acid. So I would start bringing these drugs up, and they would sell them, to all their friends on the campus. So it almost became like a thing, like it was like, I have drugs and I will travel. I would just basically drive around. I would smoke marijuana the whole time. I had 50 sheets of acid, right here in my door in an envelope. I got 25 pounds of weed in the back in a duffel bag. I was kind of trying to, emulate Hunter S. Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That was kind of my thing. I would go from Fairfax, I would go down 81 and I would hit all the Virginia schools. And then I would cut in Kentucky and I would come back up through Kentucky and I would hit Eastern Kentucky University, I would hit University of Kentucky. Then I would go into West Virginia to Morgantown, West Virginia University. Then I would come back down through Pennsylvania and hit Penn State at state colleges. That's really how my drug business expanded and grew, because I knew all these people that I sold drugs to in high school, and as they graduated and went to colleges, my drug business moved with them to the colleges, to these, much bigger markets. I had different guys. One of my guys at Virginia Tech, I would drop him like 10 sheets of acid every month, and like 5 pounds of marijuana. I might have my guy at West Virginia University, I might drop him 20 pounds of weed a month, and 20 sheets of acid. And I would just drop off drugs and pick up money. I was like a freelance drug dealer. I didn't have an organization. I would show up, I fronted different people drugs. Most of the time, it wasn't even cash. I fronted people drugs. And then I would have to come back. They sold it on a retail level, and I would have to come back. But I wasn't Pablo Escobar. I didn't have an organization. I wasn't running a cartel. I'm dealing with maybe, $50,000 to $150,000 worth of drugs at a time. I'm like a real low man on the totem pole in the drug world. You know, for about 8 or 9 months, that was kind of my life. I had girlfriends in a lot of the different colleges, and I was kind of continuing my rock star life from high school.
I had an apartment back in Virginia, probably about 45 minutes away, and he would just show up with like carloads full of girls. it was nuts. So he was still playing like a rock star. You know, he still had the look, the long hair, you know, leather pants, all that kind of thing. He went from being broke to having his own penthouse apartment in probably a couple months. We used to play strawberry daiquiri volleyball, you know, where you have to hold a strawberry daiquiri in one hand and play volleyball with the other hand. So everybody that lived there hated us.
By the time I was 19, I was supplying 15 colleges in 5 states with marijuana and LSD. My height for maybe about that 8 or 9 months, I was making 20 or 30,000 a month. I thought it could go on forever.
So when I went to visit him in Virginia, I didn't know how deep he was into the drug dealing. When I saw the wad of cash he had, I mean, I was like, what are you doing with all that money? Then he was telling me, oh, I trade baseball cards. Yeah. Yeah, right.
I was in a band at the time with an FBI agent. She came to me one day and said, I know he's your best friend, he needs to go away. It's just way too big, you know, everybody knows who he is, he's gonna get busted. You know, tell him, go somewhere else, don't ever come back. I kept warning him like, hey, they're looking at you. Hey, they're gonna get you. All of our phones are tapped, you know, they know everything about everything about everything. And he just wouldn't accept it. He felt he was invincible from the day I met him.
I totally called him out on his shit. Once I understood what the fuck was going on, I took him aside and I said, are you crazy? I mean, how long do you think this shit is gonna last, you know? It's not gonna last forever. And he said, I got a good thing going. Why should I stop now? I said, no. He said, I'll stop when I get enough. And I said, well, when is enough? I mean, do you have a definition of what enough is? And he didn't.
When I was kind of getting this idea that I can make a lot of money, disaster struck, and my whole world, everything, you know, that I thought I was and everything that I was trying to be kind of came crashing down. When the cop tackled the kid, panicked, he pulled the cop's gun out of his holster. That was the event that started unraveling everything I was doing. It was the summer of '91, and all my friends were back from school. So all the guys that were selling drugs, everybody was home in Fairfax. And there was a field party out in Clifton, way back in the woods in the middle of nothing. Everybody was partying, people were tripping on acid, all the things that rich suburban kids do. One of the neighbors called the cops, and as soon as the cops arrived, pretty much everybody scattered. But there was one 15-year-old kid, and he was tripping on acid pretty hard. He started running through the woods naked. They chased him. When the cop tackled the kid panicked. He pulled the cop's gun out of his holster, and he shot the cop in the arm. They arrested that kid, and, you know, he said how, you know, he was tripping on acid, and he gave up all the information, you know, who he got the acid from and stuff. It was like 7 people removed from me. But that was the event that kind of, you know, started unraveling everything I was doing. And it kind of made LSD public enemy #1 in Fairfax. I was chilling at my apartment, just smoking weed, when I got a call from one of my guys that sold acid for me. He said, hey, one of the guys that I sell to, he's having a problem with a guy. He's doing a drug deal. The guy's refusing to give him the money. So he wants me to come with him to help him get the money. It was at a 7-Eleven, and we rolled into the 7-Eleven, me, Chris Miller, and this other guy, Scott Lemos. And as soon as we get there, this dude that I don't even know, he's trying to hand me money, telling me he needs 20 more sheets of acid. And I'm telling this guy, I'm like, look, dude, I don't sell acid. I don't even know who you are. Why are you trying to give me money? And right then I kind of start getting the clue like something's not right. And I started looking around. So I see this guy over on the corner of 7-Eleven kind of watching us, acting like he's hanging out smoking a cigarette. I look over and I see these two guys in a car, and they're like totally clocking us, right? I'm like, man, what the fuck is going on? And I'm like, no, we're going someplace else, man. I don't feel, this doesn't feel comfortable. And as soon as I say that, you know, like the SWAT team, all dressed up like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know, they jump out from the back and they come and rush us and, you know, slam us all on the ground and brandish guns in our face, put zip ties on our hand behind our back, and we're laying face down on the concrete in front of the 7-Eleven. Turns out this dude that we were coming to do the deal with was an undercover agent. And, you know, still at this time, I'm so naive to the criminal justice system. I think I'm good because it was like a failed sting. I didn't give them any drugs and they didn't get any money. So still at this time, I'm thinking like, I'm good. They don't have anything on me. I'm too smart to get caught. One of the guys that came with us, Scott Lemos, we had 120 sheets of acid stashed at his house. Right when he got busted, he snitched right away and he told the cops, I don't have nothing to do with this. I got 120 sheets of acid at my house and it's Seth. All that acid, under the conspiracy laws, they attributed to me on the state level. To me, possession was like 9/10 of the law. But you know, in this new war on drugs and all the conspiracy, I mean, possession didn't matter because anybody could get busted with any amount of drugs and say it was yours. I was arrested in July 1991 on the state conspiracy charge, and they were talking 10 to life. They took me in, and basically they were trying to flip me. You know, eventually, like, they put me in a holding cell, you know, and I got out on bail. The whole time as this is going on, they're investigating, like all my friends, like my whole circle of friends that I went to high school with. Like every other day, someone would call me and say, oh yeah, the DEA came and talked to me today.
It was a weird time because it had gotten so big, there was no way he could get out of it. You know, he couldn't just walk away anymore. You know, everybody was watching him, the FBI, the police, you know, everybody knew what he was doing. And when that happened, I guess the downhill spiral kind of started.
I didn't even know it, but the whole time, you know, they were building a federal indictment against me. We got like 130 sheets of acid, which is 13,000 hits. This kid is selling drugs at these multiple colleges. We're getting all this information. You know, we're gonna turn this into a federal indictment. We didn't have any organization structures. We didn't carry any guns. You know, they made it seem like I was a kingpin and I had all these lieutenants. When it was just a bunch of like stoned and tripping on acid, you know, college kids. When my lawyer started coming to me and said, look, your case is going federal, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't, you know, the full impact of what my case going federal at the height of the war on drugs, I had no clue as to what that really meant. When the mandatory minimums and the war on drugs first started, they were getting all the crack dealers from the inner city. And then I guess by about 91, when my case came about, it was an excuse for the Eastern District of Virginia's attorney's office to say, oh, look, we prosecute white drug dealers too. They were like, you're about to be indicted on 7-10 to life counts. I'm 20 years old and they're talking about 7-10 to life counts. I'm like, what does that mean? They're like, you know, you're facing 70 to life. I'm like, I'm facing 70 to life? If you take a deal and tell them you'll cooperate, you know, you'll probably get 5 or 6 years. They might want you to set people up or, you know, testify against other people. I was kind of like, man, you know, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the guy that starts bringing other people in, making them go through everything that I'm having to go through right now. I didn't think I could, you know, look at myself in the mirror, you know, for the rest of my life.
Everybody's rolling on Seth and rolling on each other. And that's kind of when Seth and I stopped talking as much. Like everything went from being kick-ass party every day to being nothing where we couldn't even talk on the phone to each other.
I found out that he got busted when I received a subpoena to go and testify against him in front of a grand jury. I felt terrible because I knew there was nothing I could do to help my friend, and that's the only thing I wanted to do, is to help him, and I couldn't.
I didn't want to snitch on my friends. You know, I didn't want to face the charges. I just felt, you know, really like a worthless piece of shit at this point. So this is like rock bottom for me. And I just wanted to escape. But then when they told me, they said, look, if you plead guilty and tell them you're going to cooperate, they'll give you a PR bond. personal recognizance. If you're working with them, of course, they're gonna let you, go out. So I was like, that interests me, that PR bond, because I saw a way out. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. And once he said that, I was like, where do I sign? I had no intentions of cooperating, but, I wanted that PR bond because I had a little bit of money, and I figured, let me sign this, and then I can just take off and I can get out of this situation. I walked to the cliff's edge off the path, and I looked over to the raging, rapids below.
We found a suicide note. At that point, my heart dropped.
I was arrested in July 1991 on the state conspiracy charge for selling acid, and case went federal, and I signed the plea bargain. Once I decided, that I was gonna flee, my plan was to establish a different identity and basically get the fuck out of Virginia. Back then, they had these companies called Loon Panics Unlimited and Paladin Press. They sold books like The Anarchist Cookbook, and they had all these books on fake IDs. The first thing I did when I got out, I read about 25 or 30 of these books, and then kind of formed my own plan. So once I figured out I could establish a different identity, a legit identity through birth and death records and the DMV, I was like, what is the best way to make it so they won't look for me? It just kind of came to me, I'm gonna stage my suicide, I'm gonna make myself dead, so Seth Ferrante doesn't exist, and then all this will go away. I remembered reading the Washington Post, people committing suicide at Great Falls National Park. In this one section in Great Falls, it's like Class 5 rapids. I spent, like a couple weeks planning and plotting this. I would floss my teeth like really, really hard so my gums bled. And then I would take like my clothes or the shirts that I was gonna throw in the water, and I would put my blood on it, because I figured, if they didn't find a body, if they found the clothes and they found my blood on it, that would give them my DNA so they could identify who I was. I drove into Great Falls National Park in October of 1991, parked my car there. I had a suicide note in my car. I felt numb, I felt gray, but at the same time, I had hope that I could escape this tragic and awful predicament that I found myself in at the age of 20 years old. I walked to the cliff's edge off the path, and I looked over to the raging, rapids below, and I actually imagined myself, jumping in, getting smashed on the rocks and drowning, and committing suicide. I took some boots, a pair of pants, and a shirt, and I threw it in the water. I left my wallet, my cigarettes, a bottle of vodka, some marijuana, and my jacket right there. I made it seem like I was sitting there, and then I jumped in the water. That was the scene that I was trying to set up. It was almost kind of like a release.
I got a knock on my door, and it was the US Marshals. They told me Seth didn't show up for his sentencing, and we found a suicide note. At that point, my heart dropped. I was just kind of numb. Like, oh no, he broke. This is awful. That lasted about 10 seconds, and then I said to myself, fuck no. He is totally on the run. He would never commit suicide.
And I just started laughing. I was like, what? And I'm like, no. I'm like, he loves himself. He's not gonna kill himself. Nobody loves Seth as much as Seth loves Seth,
After I faked my death at Great Falls in October of '91, I got right on the plane and I flew right to California. My plan was to establish a different identity, and I was hoping with the suicide, I figured after 7 years, if they didn't catch me, I would be declared legally dead. There would be no more case, there would be no more Seth Ferrante. I would still be alive. I would just be somebody else living a different life. Rented a room in Hollywood. I was at a low point, was crushed. Everything that I had built up until that point was gone, and everything that I identified myself with was gone. So I started hanging out with a bunch of musicians and going out and partying. And I probably had about, 25 grand. And in 6 months, I'd spent all that money. So, then I was like really up shit creek without a paddle. When I was in LA, I was going down to the newsstands every day, reading the Washington Post, checking the Metro section. And then, that's when I saw it one day. Fairfax LSD kingpin, fake suicide, prosecutors say it's a hoax. Everything was planned right, but I missed one little detail. And that one little detail was I faked my suicide on the wrong side of the dam. Going into DC on the Potomac River, they have all the bridges, so they have a series of dams before it goes out to the Atlantic Ocean. I thought my body would float out to the Atlantic Ocean, but since I did it on the wrong side of the dam, my body would have floated to the dam, and they dragged the river, and they didn't discover a body. Once that happened, I was kind of like, fuck, what am I gonna do? My whole plan, make myself disappear and be declared legally dead after 7 years, just fucked. What I ended up doing was one of my friends from Virginia was actually going to college at the University of Texas, Arlington. I went to Arlington, Texas, and I started staying with him. I used to get weed out of Texas, from this guy named Mexican Eddie. And so I got back in contact with him. He started fronting me weed, 5 or 10 pounds at a time. I was working at a restaurant as a cook, and I was selling, quarter ounces of weed to all the waiters and waitresses. So eventually, one of the cooks at the restaurant, who was from St. Louis, he was like, hey man, I'm gonna go up to St. Louis this weekend. You wanna come up with me? We can go party and stuff. And I was like, shit, you got some friends who can sell some weed? And he was like, yeah, man, I know tons of people up there that I went to high school with. I went to my guy, Mexican Eddie. He fronted me 5 pounds, went to St. Louis, and we might have only sold like 3.5 or 4 pounds. But I made enough connections there with some of his friends, where I could start transporting weed from Dallas, Texas, up to Missouri. And boom, just like that, I was right back in the drug game. I finished selling the weed that I got, and I take off back down to Texas. Right when I get down there, my friend, he's like, the fucking US Marshals were fucking at my house today asking about you. You need to get the fuck out of here. When I first started taking weed from Dallas to St. Louis when I was a fugitive, I was bringing like 5, 10 pounds. Then I built it up, where I was doing 25 up to 50 pounds at a time. I was probably making about $1,000 a pound. Made a lot of connections around the St. Louis area for smaller guys, like taking 2, 3 pounds. I hooked up with a guy at the University of Missouri. This guy was taking a lot. Like I could unload like 10 and 20 pounds with him at a time. And really, I felt like I started getting my swag back. I started becoming Seth Ferrante again. I was an outlaw, I was a counterculture rebel. I was a drug dealer. I was giving the people what they want. It just so happens, that I was violating, a lot of federal and state laws. I met my future wife, Diane Schulte, in the spring of 1993. A really beautiful girl. I was attracted to her, so we started dating.
When I first met Seth, he just had that persona of being like a rock star. Everybody was immediately attracted to him. He was like a magnet to all the girls.
Diane knew that I was dealing drugs. She didn't know that my name was Seth Ferrante and that I had this big LSD kingpin case out of Virginia. I went by Chris, but everybody used to call me Christopher Haas. I painted a backstory like I was from Texas, and I even kind of changed my accent a little from being in Texas. I would talk, kind of real slow and be like, what's up, Captain? What's up, Haas? So everybody, back at me, they started calling me Christopher Haas. When I was a fugitive, I had a bunch of different IDs and different names. Christopher Michaels, Christopher Maple, Jacob Birchfield, Samuel Ladd, Timothy Maple.
Chris Haas?
Yeah, I never had an ID in that name, though. I was with a friend of mine, and he used to sell weed for me. We were going out, to party in Main Street in St. Charles. and we were both making drops on the way. We went to go do his drop first with a half pound at TGI Fridays. And he actually ran in with the weed and then, came back out. So then we went and did my drop, and I dropped off the half pound of weed. We went to this Burger King parking lot, and we were actually waiting for the guy that I dropped the weed off with to come and bring me the money to complete the sale. And then the dude was taking like an extra long time, so we were like waiting in the car. I'm like, man, let's just fire up a joint right here. And my friend was like, nah, man, let's drive behind the Burger King. So we drive back behind the Burger King and smoke the joint. But we didn't know that Burger King had got robbed like a week before. The employees saw us sitting out back. So they called the cops. Cops come, they pull up on us, we're smoking a joint. Immediately, the cops want to search the car. They asked my friend whose truck it is, they're like, hey, can we search your car? And he's like, yeah. They started searching his car. The half pound that he was supposed to drop off, he didn't drop off. I found out later, he said the kitchen, they were slammed, so he couldn't get the guy's attention, so he just kept the weed in the car. He had it in a guitar case, and unfortunately, the cops found that. They arrested us both. We're sitting in the station in St. Charles, a narcotics cop put us like face to face, and he's like, you guys are gonna tell me what's going on here. I'm gonna get, to the bottom of this story. And then I was like, man, I gotta come up with some plausible type of story to get us out of this now, right? I had known a local guy that I was selling weed to that I heard that he had got busted, like a month before or something. So I actually dropped his name to the cop. And luckily, my friend, he knew him too, and so he like backed up my story. So I told him, yeah, this dude, I said, yeah, that's who we get our weed from. I'm like, man, I'll set you up. So they cut us loose, and then I was calling the cop every day. They were like, oh, you're gonna set this dude up? I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna set it up. I'm gonna do a 5-pound deal for you, don't worry. But the whole time, I was like, fuck this. I ain't staying in St. Louis. They took my prints. They're gonna match up my prints. Again, I'm like, man, I need to get the fuck out of here. I collect as much money as I can from people that owe me money. I finish selling the weed that I got, and I take off back down to Texas. Go right to my friend who's at the University of Texas at Arlington. And right when I get down there, he tells me, he's like, dude, he's like, the fucking US Marshals were fucking at my house today asking about you. And I'm like, the fuck are they doing down here? He's like, I don't know, man. But he's like, man, you need to get the fuck out of here. I was just getting my swag back. I was just like, becoming, Seth Ferrante again. It's like, boom, they just ripped the carpet out from me again. So I come up with this plan. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna bounce, I'm gonna go underground, but I'm gonna get 25 pounds of pot, and I'm gonna go right back to St. Louis, the scene of the motherfucking crime, and I'm gonna sell this fucking weed and get as much money as I can and go underground so they can't find me. In my mind, I was thinking, if they're looking for me in Texas, they're not gonna be looking for me in St. Louis, so I think I'm safe. They don't know where the fuck I am. So I go right back to St. Louis like a dumbass. 25 pounds of pot. I'm not even there a couple days. I'm moving some of the pot. I'm not really sleeping, because I'm paranoid, man, because the walls are closing in around me. I thought I was, free of all the law enforcement stuff, but, they got me again. The clock is ticking. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get rid of this weed. I'm trying to get the money so I can go underground and I can disappear. Early the next morning, kind of laying there sleeping, like real early, like 5 or 6 in the morning, and it's like, boom, boom, boom. They bust the hotel room door down. There's like, 3 or 4 US Marshals in their bulletproof vest. They came right up to me on the bed. I'm lying on the bed, I can't even get up. And, they got a gun right on my head, right on my forehead. There's 2 guys behind them, they got guns on me. I mean, they're coming in like the Gestapo. I'm 22 years old at this time. I'm a first-time nonviolent offender, yet I'm getting treated, like I'm Whitey Bulger or something. And I'm just like, man, fuck, I can't even get a fucking break in this shit, right? They handcuffed me. I didn't even try to say I was anybody else. Like, yeah, you got me. I'm Seth Ferrante. There's fucking 20 pounds of weed right there, all my fake IDs. I got a little bit of money. Let me be Seth Ferrante again. I'm sick of being Christopher Haas. I'm sick of being a fugitive. Let's just go get it over with. Give me my time and let me go to jail and do what I gotta do. When I first got caught, They're putting me in the holding pen, and all the marshals, like, they're coming by to look at me. I felt like I'm an animal in the zoo or something. And they're like, hey, man, can you sign your wanted poster? They buy me a Coke and give me a candy bar. You know, that's when I found out. You know, they're like, oh, yeah, you're top 15. I'm like, I'm top 15? I'm like, why the fuck would I be top 15 US Marshals that's never fucking carried a gun in my life? But it was the height of the war on drugs, so I was just fucked.
Seth is on the top 15 most wanted marshals list. Seth, are you kidding me? I couldn't hurt a fly. What? Nothing made sense from that point on.
The first time Diane found out my real name was when the US Marshals, you know, went to her house looking for me.
When they started telling me, do you know Seth Ferrante? And I'm like, who? Because I only knew him as Christopher Haas. They showed me the wanted picture, and it was just such a shock to me. But at the same time, I was like, wow, that's actually kind of cool. Seth is cool. But at the same time, it was like I couldn't believe that, you know, he wasn't who he said he was, you know.
I got sentenced in December of 1993. He sentenced me to 292 months. Even when I got sentenced, I was in the courtroom and I heard the judge, you know, read the sentence, and he said 292 months. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, 292 months? I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound that bad. You know, but then I kind of start calculating in my mind. I'm like, 292 months divided by 12. I'm like, fuck, that's 25 fucking years, you know? I was like, that's unbelievable. It's like I'm in this bad movie that never ends. And then they shipped me off to federal prison. When I got in, I was taking college classes, you know, a lot of journalism, a lot of creative writing. I started out writing for prison newsletters for places like Families Against Mandatory Minimum, like their Famgram. You know, they would publish like my articles. You know, that's how I started writing for Vice. I started writing for Don Diva magazine. You know, I started writing for Feds magazine. Writing for me, it was like an anger management tool, because I was so angry, man, that I had 25 years. There's not a lot of careers that you can start in prison, but I was like, man, this is like a viable career that I can start now. So with Diane's help, we formed Guerrilla Convict. That was my publishing house.
The thing that I'm most proud about is just how we stuck it out. It's like we knew we were soulmates. And even to this day, he always says that he's been reincarnated. And every lifetime, he said I was the one that was always there for him. When we got married in prison, it was just me and him. Our witnesses were 2 correctional officers. On my wedding day, I had a white T-shirt and a pair of jeans. And I kept telling him, I was like, your hands are all sweaty. He's like, I'm nervous.
I started my journey inside the belly of the beast in October 1993. I got out in August of 2014. I did a total of 21 years in prison.
When Seth first got out, that day I was so nervous and scared, but it was just the ride home was so surreal, because all those years I would drive home by myself, you know, and then to have him actually sit next to me, it was just like an awesome feeling.
I can honestly say ever since that, you know, first time when I met her, I mean, she's just been the biggest influence and the biggest supporter and the biggest person in my life. Really, when I was young and into the drug scene, I had the ambition. I just totally focused my ambition like in the totally wrong thing. I mean, how stupid can you be? I wanted to be a drug dealer, the biggest drug dealer I could at the height of the war on drugs. I mean, just looking back now, it's ludicrous. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. And I just think, man, if I would have had my ambition and my drive in the right direction like I do now, you know, who knows what I could have accomplished. I got 22 books out now. I wrote and produced a documentary, White Boy. I want to be the next Quentin Tarantino. I want my name to ring bells like that.